Okay, so let's look at menstrual cycle or disorders of menstruation. So this is a very important topic and very common presentation in gynae OPD. More than 60% of the cases. The knowledge of its physiology helps understand gynecological disorders, and also the knowledge is very important in the management of other gynae conditions, for example, infertility. So normal menstruation is a cyclical phenomenon involving the partial shedding of the uterine endometrium with associated blood loss per vaginum. So there is cryptomenorrhea and retrograde menstruation. So the female menstrual cycle is determined by complex interaction of hormones, and the predominant hormones involved in the menstrual cycle are gonadotropin releasing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and progesterone. The gonadotropin releasing hormone is secreted by the hypothalamus, and the gonadotropins, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone are secreted by the anterior pituitary gland, and estrogen and also progesterone are secreted at the level of the ovary. Gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary, which in turn stimulates the release of estrogen and progesterone at the level of the ovary. So we have the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. In the presence of the gonadotropin releasing hormone pulse, as every 90 minutes the pituitary and the ovarian hormones exert mutual control over the circulating levels of one another. So the menstrual cycle, there are basically two phases, ideally 14 days each: the follicular and the luteal phase, and the proliferative and the secretory phase. So the follicular and the luteal phases describe the changes in the ovary, and the proliferative and secretory describes the changes in the endometrium. The uterine endometrial cycle can be divided into these three phases: the follicular or proliferative phase, the luteal or secretory phase, and the menstrual phase. Let's look at these phases. Okay. So the menstrual cycle, in order for the menstrual cycle to proceed normally, the gonadotropin releasing hormone must be released in pulses. As on average, the frequency of gonadotropin releasing hormone secretion is once every 90 minutes during the early follicular phase. And let's look at the hormonal interactions. So the complex interactions between the pituitary, the ovarian hormones involve forward control, positive feedback, and negative feedback mechanisms, and serve to sustain a self-perpetuating monthly endocrine cycle. So the menstrual phase begins as the spiral arteries rupture secondary to ischemia, and also releasing blood into the uterus, and the apoptosed endometrium is slugged off and usually starts 4 days. Let's look at parts of the endometrium. It's basically divided into two portions: the functionalis and the basalis. So the functionalis undergoes changes throughout the menstrual cycle and is shed during menstruation, while the basalis remains constant during the menstrual cycle and regenerates the functionalis each time. Okay, let me show you this particular diagram. I think it will help you to understand better. Okay, so you can see the cycles: the growing follicle, ovulation, corpus luteum, and the corpus albicans. So the resulting ischemia may cause some early menstrual cramps, and by 28 days of the menstrual cycle, there is intense vasoconstriction and subsequent ischemia, which cause mass apoptosis of the functionalis. So during the menstrual phase, as a phase of menstruation, is a phase of the cycle, and the last 45 days, the disruption and disintegration of the endometrial glands and stroma, leukocyte infiltration, RBCs, red blood cell extravasation, so sloughing of the functionalis, compression of the basalis, renewed tissue growth within the basalis. So during this period, the functionalis is completely shed, and arterial and venous blood, remnants of endometrial stroma and glands, leukocytes, and red blood cells are all present in the menstrual flow. So the follicular phase, basically what happens is that the follicular and the proliferative phases span from the end of the menstruation until the next ovulation. There are increasing levels of estrogen, as in that induces proliferation of the functionalis from the stem cells of the basalis, and also proliferation of the endometrial glands and proliferation of the stromal connective tissues. So the proliferative phase, the endometrial proliferation or growth is secondary to estrogenic stimulation, and by the end of this stage, the cellular proliferation and endometrial growth has reached a maximum level. There are numerous mitotic activities. Spiral arteries are elongated and convoluted, and endometrial glands are straight with a narrow lumen containing glycogen. Follicular development before ovulation occurs. One follicle evolves into a dominant follicle and develops an antrum, whilst the remaining primary follicles undergo atresia. So the dominant follicle is now called the Graafian follicle, and this completes its first meiotic division. So at ovulation, the secondary oocyte and coronal radiata are expelled into the peritoneal cavity and taken up by the fallopian tube. So let's look at the pre-ovulation and the ovulation states. That's between days 13 to 14. And just some few endocrinology. So 1 day before ovulation, there's a surge of luteinizing hormone, and this occurs with follicle stimulating hormone level and the division of the follicle stimulating hormone levels. So this is also increased temporarily. So the LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, both increase due to positive feedback by estrogen at the level of the pituitary gland. These hormones begin to decrease back to the baseline levels almost immediately. And by the time ovulation occurs, the LH and the FSH are on the decline. You can see that in the diagram. So let's look at the LH surge. So the pre-ovulatory luteinizing hormone surge drives the oocyte into the first meiotic division and initiates utinization of the thecal and granulosa cells, and the resulting corpus luteum produces high levels of progesterone and some estrogen. So ovulation, there's an LH spike which stimulates ovulation and releases the ovum from the follicle. The secretory phase. Following ovulation, the progesterone secretion by the corpus luteum stimulates the granular cells to produce glycogen, mucus, and others, and the glands become tortuous and filled, and the stroma becomes edematous too. So mitosis is very, very rare. The spiral arteries extend into the superficial layer. So if pregnancy does not occur by day 23, the corpus luteum regresses, secretion of progesterone and E2 declines, endometrial involution occurs, and days 25 to 26, the endothelium and thromboxane begins to mediate vasoconstriction of the spiral arteries. So 1 day before menstruation is marked by constriction of the spiral arteries, with this leads to ischemia of the endometrium, endocyte infiltration, and RBCs, red blood cell extravasation. And also there is prostaglandin effect that results in pain. Okay, so let's look at the late luteal phase, as from days 22 to 28. So if fertilization does not occur, corpus luteum is not maintained by HCG, the hemochorionic gonadotropin. So the corpus luteum degenerates after 14 days. Estrogen and progesterone levels fall. Withdrawal of progesterone causes secretory endometrium to slough, and the 28, E2, and progesterone are at their lowest levels. So the negative feedback from the follicle stimulating hormone is removed, and the FSH levels slowly rise again in absence of negative feedback, and that leads to menstruation. So let's look at the luteal phase. If fertilization occurs, there is development of thromboblasts, um, and this developing thromboblast synthesizes human chorionic gonadotropin, and this maintains the corpus luteum so that it may continue producing estrogen and progesterone to support the endometrium. And by 8 to 10 weeks gestation, the placenta is developed and takes over the production of estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so basically that's what occurs during the menstrual cycle.